Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the show wearefree.tv, the channel of the people, by the people, for the people, where I entertain different guests from around the world, discussing various subjects from fifth dimension, raising of frequency, different spirituality subjects, new age ideas, from quantum physics and quantum mechanics to biology, alternative medicine, alternative science, advanced science, different aliens, channeling, and various other exciting subjects that are not commonly known to be discussed on mainstream media. However, here on wearefree.tv, we entertain all these lovely subjects by talking to different people from around the world. I'd also like to thank the people who have donated, as we depend on your donations to remain an independent channel. The details are mentioned up here. Whoever wishes to donate, thank you very much. Also, please do join our Telegram group, which is No Censorship TV, as you can see down here. You're also welcome to go to our website, which is wearefree.tv. Once you're there, click on the English icon, and then you can click on Join Us, send us your email, and then you'll be added to our mailing list and be notified by email whenever a new interview is released. Other than that, please feel free to post and share this interview on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, and any other social media that you might be a part of. Highly appreciated. We need you to help us share this information. Thank you very much. And now I can move on to today's interview. My guest today is Mr. Phil Borges. He is a photographer, filmmaker, author, and lecturer. The name of the interview is Psychosis and Spiritual Awakening. We're going to discuss tribal people, the Dalai Lama, shamans, crazywise, psychosis, consciousness, and many more interesting things. So, hello there, Mr. Phil Borges. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Michael. Thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come on. I mean, how lovely. So, maybe perhaps you could just introduce yourself briefly so people know who you are in general.
Well, you did a pretty good job, but yeah, my name is Phil Borges. I have been engaged in interviewing and documenting tribal and indigenous people over the last 30 years. Prior to that, I was an orthodontist for 18 years, so I did a major shift in professions when I was 45 years old. This last part of my journey has been just fascinating. It's taken me from the world of tribal people into the world of mental health and psychosis in a very strange and winding path. Now I'm looking at the spirituality behind my journey and looking at the pieces and the turns and twists that have brought me to where I am at this point.
And what made you, what fascinated you about these tribal people? How did it all start?
Well, yeah, in the beginning. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in the summers, I would spend my summers on a ranch, very isolated ranch in Utah. And we, on the ranch, lived very close to the land. We grew all our food. We even made our own soap. We very seldomly went into town to get supplies. So I really had an affinity for people that lived close to the land. And that drew me in my travels. Even while I was an orthodontist, I traveled a lot on my vacations. And that's where I'd find myself. Not in Paris or London, but in some remote village in Africa or New Guinea. So I just had this natural attraction, it seems.
I see. Okay, fair enough. There doesn't always have to be a specific reason. So the first place you documented is Tibet. So what did you discover there in terms of human rights, interviewing refugees, the book and exhibition of photographs that you've done?
Right. Yeah. So when I made this transition from a orthodontist to a photographer, the first thing I was doing was a lot of commercial work because I still had to support myself and my family. My son had just been born. So I did that for about 4 years, and I had this yearning to get back to traveling to the places I wanted to. And I wanted to combine my photographic work with my love of travel to these places. And I met a woman I live in Seattle. So I met a woman that had started an organization, and this is back in 1993 when we didn't have that much here in the U.S. anyway, recognition of what was going on in Tibet. So this woman who had this Tibetan rights organization approached me and said, "I love the images you're making, and would you consider doing a story on Tibet?" And I said, yes. I'd always wanted to go to Tibet, and I had never gone.
Yeah, me too.
So I headed over there with that mission to tell this story. She told me a little bit about what was going on. Mao took over Tibet in 1949. It's been occupied ever since. The Dalai Lama had to escape when he was 24 years old into India. Nehru gave him a little village to have a Tibetan colony in exile, and that's called Dharamsala, India. And she suggested that I start this project, not by going to Tibet, but by going into Dharamsala and interviewing the people that are there, the refugees flowing in from Tibet, and the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile.
Okay.
So that's how I started.
What did you discover there?
Well, many, many things. I mean, I went there to do this story of a human rights abuse, and it turned into so much more than that. But so the first thing I did, and this little organization here in Seattle didn't have any money, but they lined me up with contacts over there. So I was given an interpreter to work with and a place to stay in Dharamsala. So that really helped me a lot. And so with my interpreter, I went about interviewing these refugees, what they call new arrivals that were just coming into Dharamsala from Tibet. And by the way, that journey especially out of Lhasa into Nepal and then into India and up to Dharamsala, it's a 30-day journey by foot, and they have to cross over 19,000 foot passes in the Himalayas. So they're very motivated to get to Dharamsala. And so when I was interviewing them, I heard all sorts of stories of torture in prison, family members being killed, being starved, being shocked with cattle prods while in prison, it wouldn't take much. All you would have to do is put up a poster in downtown Lhasa protesting the occupation of the country, and that would get you locked up and many times tortured. So I interviewed monks that had been in prison for 33 years, been tortured. One monk I remember very well, Paulden, had all his teeth kicked out in beatings. He had been in prison 33 years. I met him 2 weeks after he arrived in Dharamsala. And so it was a very brutal introduction to what was happening there.
Yeah, indeed. And okay, so what about the book?
Okay, so anyway, yeah, I hadn't even planned on a book at that point. My thing was putting together portraits of people individuals and writing a little bit about their story and putting a group of those portraits together to tell a story in an exhibition. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I was working for, is to do this exhibition here in Seattle and hopefully travel it around the country. And I wanted to interview everybody from the most remote nomad in Tibet to the Dalai Lama, and do it in a way that you could go and look at this exhibition and read their bios, just a few sentences under each photograph, and you get an idea what was going on in Tibet. So that's what I started to do. I just wanted to show what this human rights problem was. Yeah. And so what really happens in many of my, much of my work, is I'll start working on a project and all of a sudden something will happen and I'll get a whole new slant on it. And so what happened in Dharamsala on that first visit is I was about 4 or 5 weeks into doing all these interviews, and there was an announcement that the Dalai Lama was going to give this public address. So I went to the occasion, and there was a small group of us Westerners, maybe 10 or 12 Westerners there, and we had a little FM radio listening to the translation. But I was kind of sitting up in front. The Dalai Lama was kind of behind me speaking to the crowd, but I could also look out into the crowd. And I was looking at so many of the people that I had interviewed and the people that had all these horrible stories. And there was one point in his talk that I'll never forget where he said, you know, you should treat your enemies as precious jewels, because it's your enemies, not your friends and family. It's your enemies that are going to take you into your own tolerance and patience on the way to your own enlightenment. So I thought, wow, what a different way for a leader, especially a leader that's been kicked out of his country and living in exile, to address his people. I mean, the typical thing is to raise up in anger and fight back. And he was doing quite the opposite. So all of a sudden I realized this wasn't just any human rights issue. This had much more depth to it. So
because of the reaction of the Dalai Lama, it had more depth than anywhere else?
Yeah, just because the way he was approaching the problem. I mean, typically, take a look at most leaders.
Yeah, I understand. Like in America, world. Imagine what the American president would have done in his shoes. He would have said, we're going to go and destroy whoever attacked us and bomb them off the planet, you know? So I know what you mean.
I mean, you remember George Bush with a megaphone on top of the World Trade Center rubble.
Yeah.
You'll hear from us. And we did, and the world did hear from us, but did it do much good?
No.
Yeah.
And also there's turn the other cheek, you know, like Jesus said, in a way that Dalai Lama is promoting that.
Yeah, so he was really walking the walk, and, you know, and so I was very impressed with that. The book I did ended up being titled Tibetan Portrait, Power of Compassion. So this human rights story took a whole different turn.
Yeah. So did you actually meet the Dalai Lama?
Yeah, I did his portrait, but I met him even before that, because all of a sudden I was invited to do this and that I had never expected. One of them was just stand in I guess you would call it a reception line, almost like a wedding reception line, as these new arrivals came in. He would meet them one by one. And I've never seen the devotion to a leader like I have the Tibetan people's devotion to the Dalai Lama. I mean, people that had walked all this way, there were, I interviewed nuns that were 69, 70 years old they would faint at his feet. There were a couple of people that actually fainted when they came to meet him. And he would get down with them and talk with them and help them and ask his helpers to make sure they had a place to stay. And all the time they're trying to move him along because he has a packed schedule.
Yeah.
And so I was able to stand almost next to him in one of those receiving lines and just watch the way he was. And I'm always a little bit suspicious of leaders and people in authority. What are they really like? And I really got this sense, this guy is really a genuine spiritual leader, really.
I was going to ask you how you felt, because I know some people kind of break down crying when they are in his presence, and they can feel the enlightenment, glowing off him. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that. And when I was in Tibet, finally, I carried in, which was illegal, little like playing card pictures of the Dalai Lama. I took in about 20 of them, and I had to hide them because it's illegal to have a picture of the Dalai Lama in Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would meet somebody I really admired and liked, and I'd usually do their portrait and an interview, I'd give them one of these pictures, and they would just stand, hold it to their foreheads, and just stay there for a few minutes. And there's a lot of admiration for him.
What about his portrait?
I met him later of course, when he did the talk, and then I did his portrait, and I spent a couple of days just talking to his secretary and his handlers to let me take it up on his rooftop because I wanted the Himalayas in the background. They wanted me to do it on the front porch amongst all the bougainvilleas. And no, I wanted the mountains in the background, where he came from. And so they eventually let me. But on that day, he was doing another welcoming the new arrivals. And so it got later and later, and I was really nervous because the sun was going down. I was losing my light, and I was lighting things. I had a soft box, and so I had to balance my lights with the ambient light. So I was taking Polaroids of my assistant, so everything would be perfect when he came. Anyway, it got later and later. He was about 2 hours late. And so when he walked up the stairs to this landing on his roof, I was nervous, and I wanted to show him the book I was doing because I had some pictures that I had made. And he noticed I was nervous. So he just walked up to me. I kind of held out my hand. I didn't know what to do, shake his hand, but he avoided my hand, and he just reached around and jabbed his fingers in my ribs and tickled me and let out a big laugh. And that's the way the Dalai Lama met me.
Really?
He's just light and funny, and he's not. It was like saying, "Okay, cool down. Everything's going to be all right. Don't worry about it." And that was my meeting to do his portrait.
I see. Now, what about his oracle? I've never heard about that. Could you tell us about his oracle?
Yeah. So the other thing that happened was kind of magical. I met a guy there, Mick Brown, who was a columnist for the Daily Telegraph in London, and he was there to do a story on the Nechung Oracle. So the Nechung Oracle is a disembodied spirit that an individual known as a Kutin by the Tibetan people, we would call the person a shaman probably. The Kutin was a 30-year-old monk, and Mick was assigned to go in and interview the Kutin. And so I met
who's
Mick.
Disembodied?
The oracle.
And this the Kutin communicates with him, with the disembodied spirit?
Yeah, the Kutin is what we would call a channeler, somebody that channels a disembodied spirit.
I see. And there's only one. There's only one Kutin.
No, there's many Kutins in Tibet.
And only
But
one
this,
oracle.
the oracle, I don't know if there's more than one oracle, but this oracle is the Nechung oracle, and he is the protector spirit of the Tibetan people.
Uh-huh. And he's
And
channeled by
there's
that one Kutin, or maybe others can also channel, it doesn't matter. So what happened?
I believe the Kutin we met, Thupten Nordup is his name, 30-year-old monk, is the only one that channels the Nechung oracle.
Okay. Wow.
And he's still doing it to this day.
Okay.
So this was 1993, 94. And when I was doing the film Crazywise, I met him in LA. How many years later? It was like 25 years later. He was 53. So anyway, I was invited to go by Mick to go in and watch him go into trance.
Yeah.
In this little monastery right next to the Dalai Lama's residence. It's a small monastery. There's only about 40 monks in the monastery. So we went in, and he came in, the Kutin came in, and he was dressed in this ceremonial robe with this big black mirror on his chest, very ornamental. I learned later that this robe itself weighs 50 pounds. Mm. And he sits down in this chair, and they put this hat on his head that weighs another 30 or 40 pounds, and all decorated with various deities. Yeah, it's very elaborate. I'll just say that. Yeah. And it weighs a lot. And he sits down. They put that hat on his head. The monks start chanting and beating their drums, and his eyes rolled back, and he went into this, looked like a trance-like state. And then he started talking in this kind of high-pitched voice. It sounded somewhat unnatural, speaking Tibetan. I had no idea what he was saying. And one of the monks was, just busy writing everything he said down. And after about 5 or 6 minutes, he collapsed, and they had to carry him out of the room. And so I didn't know if this was just kind of like a play or, a ceremony that had a lot of drama built into it that he had to act out. So I was just left wondering, what is this all about? And so 2 days later, Mick was invited to go in and interview him, and he invited me to come along. And so we sat in the interview, and one of the questions was, how did you get chosen to be the Kutin? And he talked about, hearing voices, having these wild mood swings, personality changes. He thought he was dying. He felt these electrical shocks going up his spine, he said, that were very painful. And anyway, to me, I was thinking to myself, this sounds like a psychotic break or some sort of mental, emotional breakdown. And so that really registered with me. But the thing I remember about that interview was how humble this guy was. I was expecting this big performance type personality, by what I'd seen in the monastery, but very humble. He said, I didn't know what was happening to me, and the older monks took him aside and told him he very well could have the ability to be a Kutin, and they started him in this initiation process, and there he was.
So when the other day, when he was the day before, I don't know how many days, when he was channeling, you say he collapsed and he was taken away. What was he channeling? Do you have any idea of the content of what he was talking about?
I don't. I didn't find out what exactly he was channeling, but I know for instance, when the Dalai Lama escaped Tibet, he had spent, I don't know, 10, 15 years trying to make peace with Mao and at the same time allow for religious freedom in his country. And it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen. So there was a belief, I don't know if it came from the Kooten, but somehow they got information that the Chinese government was about to imprison him and possibly kill him. Mm-hmm. So they consulted a Kooten, not this one, but another one back then. And the Kooten told him how to leave Tibet, the route to take, to disguise himself as a peasant on horseback. And that's how he left. So they relied on the Kooten to get him out of Tibet.
Yeah.
And so in this case, you know, they still have to make all these decisions of state, being a government in exile. And so they rely on the Kooten for that. And we asked the Dalai Lama, do you really rely on the Kooten for all that, to make those decisions? And what he said was really interesting to me. He said, you know, if we completely relied on the Kooten, that would be extreme. And if we completely ignored him, that would be extreme. So they balance their rational minds with this, I guess you would call it, intuitive spiritual information that comes through the Kooten.
Spiritual intelligence services of the Tibetans, like the CIA of Tibet. So moving on from Tibet, I understand that you interviewed more than 40 shamans all over the world. So what's that all about? What kind of shamans did you interview, and where, and what did you learn?
Yeah. So I went from there to just wanting to do more documentation of human rights issues in different parts of the world, and just documenting tribal people in general. And so I started doing that, and I was doing a piece for Amnesty International in Kenya about 2 years, a year and a half after that interview with the Kooten. And it was up in northern Kenya with a tribe called the Samburu. And we run across, my interpreter and myself, come across their main, what they call predictor healer. And her name was Sakulan. She was 37 years old. She had 5 kids. So she had a full-time job of raising kids, but she also was their main visionary healer. And so I asked her, how did you get chosen? And she had a very similar story. She said she was not only hearing voices, she was having visions, she was having these intense nightmares or dreams at night, sometimes very disturbing. She also thought she was dying. By the way, I've heard that many, many times in the various shamans I've interviewed. And it was her grandmother that took her aside and said, you know, you've got a very special sensitivity that can be used for the tribe here. And it's important that you go, it's a calling, and it's important that you go to an initiation. And the grandmother helped her through this period of integrating, I guess you would call it, or giving meaning to what she was going through, and which allowed her to relax into it instead of being totally frightened and
like in the West,
not knowing.
In the West, they just stick her in a nut house.
In the West, we say you've got a pathology. Yeah. There's something wrong with your brain.
Yeah.
It's
Here's
not
some
working.
medication and a straitjacket.
Yeah, exactly. Give a chemical straitjacket, if you will.
Yeah. So where else? What other shamans? I mean, I love my shamanism, but in my case, it was more like I've tried ayahuasca 10 times, which is amazing. And every time it was with a shaman, once with a Colombian shaman and once with a Brazilian shaman and different other shamans, even English shamans. And, their role there is to administer the medicine, as they call it. Then they do all the things with the feathers and the prayers, and they talk, a lot about spiritual stuff. And also, I know shamans are medicine men, and women. They're meant to cure people, who are ill with different things, and they have all this traditional knowledge that was passed down to them from generation to generation. So, what else? Where else did you meet shamans? And maybe in
boy, I have a lot of questions to ask you because I just to show you where I am in this process. You've done things that I haven't done that I'm about to do. I've documented a lot of people taking ayahuasca. I have never taken it.
How come? Fear.
No. I'm a child of the 60s. I was living in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco in the mid-60s during the Summer of Love. So I was living a couple of doors down from the Grateful Dead, and I was surrounded by psychedelics.
Yeah, but did you use psychedelics? Did you take LSD in the 60s? Pardon me? Did you take LSD in the 60s?
Yes, I did. I did
brilliant.
It once, twice, and I say once or twice. Once I really had a strong dose, and yes, and it was just recreational, and I had a bit of a hard time with it.
Yep.
To tell you,
it depends where you take it. You need to. The setup is crucial. If you take LSD in the wrong place, like in the middle of the city, or even in a crowded place, it's going to be hell. It could be literally hell on earth. Whereas if you do it in nature on a nice sunny day, and you have, by the river or a stream of water, then you're fine, with a place to chill out. You'll just lie on the grass and look up and just wait for it to, to pass. Whereas if you're in the city trying to make your way on the underground back home, God, it's like terrible, absolute nightmare.
Have you done it?
Many times.
Tried to make your way back home on the underground?
Yeah, I have had bad trips, but as Bill Hicks says, there's no such thing as bad trips. A bad trip is a good trip, only bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm about to do it, and I know all about set and setting, and I know it's important to get a period of integration afterwards. In fact, that's very important. Evidently, if you see your shadow and that comes out, but we can talk about that later. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, talk about it now. So just so you know, first of all this integration, just do it. Find a good shaman. That's the most important thing. There's loads of them in South America and also in America. I'm sure where you live, there are shamans who come over and there's good medicine, and you just, hopefully you'll be recommended somebody who's done it with that shaman before. And then you're invited to a ceremony, and you just come there and surrender to the ceremony, and whatever happens, and just agree to do it. And you will be afraid, and you might throw up and go to the toilet, but nobody dies from it, and you don't go crazy. You can only go sane. And the most amazing thing about it is, no matter how powerful and strong and out there it is, as soon as it wears out, you're back to where you were. The same person, just with another experience. And then you need to integrate it if you want to. You don't have to. It's like saying, I go and you go and you climb the Himalayas for 3 months. You go through this really intense experience. Then you come home. You either integrate it and really learn from it, or you just go back to your old life and forget about it. It depends on you. But it's highly recommended. It can only do you good. So yeah, go for it.
And I would imagine it's highly recommended to integrate it. Yeah. Integrate your new perspective.
Of course.
Which I have a lot to say about that, because I think I understand it going into it.
Yep.
But I'll find out.
You meet your inner self. You meet your most, how we all suppress stuff emotionally. but the suppression is still there. Imagine, it's still there. We don't get rid of it, we suppress it. So in a way, we are always feeling very slightly those suppressed emotions. With ayahuasca, they're just there. It's like, it's not there, it's in here, but it's very close, it's very out, it's very up. And it's very kind of, you feel it in a more intense way, but you know it. It's not like something you don't know. You know exactly what it is, only you've never felt it so strongly. So it's you. So you can't really freak out from your own self. It can only cure you, if you see what I mean, because you are not suppressing. So you are, in a way, you're relieved by actually experiencing your own emotions. And it's phenomenal. Plus you get to meet, some people meet entities. You can meet Mother Ayahuasca herself, and you can ask her questions and she can answer you. And it's not like a conversation, it's just like a telepathic thing that's going on. And it's a very cleansing and healthy thing for the body anyway. The most, by the way, another thing which you might get, I don't know if you get disappointed, but the most amazing thing is that, 1 out of 10, or maybe 2 out of 10, don't feel anything. So imagine a ceremony, 10 people drink ayahuasca, 8 of them are on the floor rolling in another dimension, and 2 are like, nothing, I'll feel it. Nothing. As if they drank water. And it's the strongest drug known to man, but some people it doesn't affect them at all. If 2 people take a drop of LSD, they will feel it. You know what I mean? Big time. And with ayahuasca, it's different. I have no idea why. So very highly recommended. What else did you learn from the shamans then? And where?
So the main thing I learned, and so mind you, I was mainly doing human rights stories, and for Amnesty, for the UN, for various NGOs. And so after Sikulan, the woman I met in Kenya, and she had the same story as the Kutan, I became fascinated with that. And when I went into a new community, be it in Papua New Guinea or Africa somewhere, or South America, North America, Arctic Circle, I've been in many different communities. I would ask, who are your healers? Who are your visionaries here? And then I would interview them and many times do a portrait of them. And I would say that almost all but a couple were identified by having a crisis in their life. And as a kid, as a teenager, maybe sometimes in the early 20s, but almost always in their teenage years. They had a crisis. Sometimes it was a physical crisis where they almost died. They had a horrible fever or an infection or something that almost killed them. But most often it was a mental emotional crisis that they described. And it was hearing voices, having visions, just personality changes. Again, many said they thought they were dying. And then they were typically taken aside by an elder, and most often by another shaman who had been through it. So it was like they got a guide who knew what it was all about.
Yeah.
Somebody had gone through the process themselves.
What if 2 of them go through it, or 5 of them? There's going to be 5 apprentices of the shaman?
At once, you mean?
Yeah.
It sounded to me like it was always one-on-one. I was talking to the person who had gone through it, and they said this person, sometimes it was their father. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, most of the time, it was just another person in the community. And it's the way it was described to me, they were going through this thing alone. It was their process. And it was their initiation. It took sometimes several years. And then they became the healer that they were when I met them.
So, so let's say at one point there's one shaman of the tribe. And then a few years later, one of the kids gets this breakdown and the shaman goes, this is my apprentice, because he's obviously showing the signs. So then he takes him under his wing and teaches him everything. And then, eventually the young kid becomes the new shaman. So and throughout all these years, no other kid would actually experience it. It's only one per lifetime or per half a lifetime, it seems to be.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure. I mean, like in Tibet, there are many kuzuns.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. So let's get to really the point of what you wanted to talk about, because you said that going back and forth between these tribes to your home, you discovered something. So, yeah, what did you discover in terms of disconnection and all that?
Yeah. Well, it's so important that to find out what your culture is all about, in my opinion, is to step into another one and see the way they do things. Then all of a sudden you notice, well, yeah, that makes sense. Or, wow, I have something to teach them. But the thing I noticed that they had that we didn't, I mean, obviously I noticed what we have that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Coca-Cola.
I go to where they're eating, maybe 3 or 4 items. That's their total diet. You go up on the Tibetan plateau, and that's what the nomads are eating: yak butter, yak cheese, Tibetan tea, and sampa, ground barley flour. That's it. No vegetables. And then you come home and walk into a Whole Foods grocery store, and voila.
And they live a long life, don't they?
Not always. I mean, it's not a romantic, glorious life.
Uh-huh.
It's hard, and physically. Many children die in childbirth. But the ones that make it, I would say, I would look at people my age, and they would look much older.
Okay, but so let's forget the Tibetans. I'm trying to understand what good things did you find out about these indigenous people everywhere, like that they're closer together, and in terms of nutrition, because you brought up that they don't eat much, but I'm thinking, indigenous people in the jungles and places like that, living off papayas and coconuts and fruit and vegetables. I'm wondering, are they healthy? Do they look healthy? Do they live a long life or not?
Yeah. Well, it varies. I can't say a blanket thing for every tribe around the world.
Yeah.
On the Tibetan plateau, they have a lot of hypertension because they drink this yak butter tea that is extremely salty. So, but you go into the Amazon, yes, they have so much available to them in terms of plants and fruits, and they eat monkeys and birds and turtle eggs. So they have this wide variety of things they eat. But you want to know about what I noticed, what I thought was really lacking in our culture.
Yes.
And that's connection. They have connection. They have connection, deeper connection to each other. They're in these small tribes, especially the hunter-gatherers, like down in the Amazon. They have to rely on each other for everything. There's no daycare centers or old age homes or lawyers to solve their arguments or social security. They have to have a reciprocal relationship with each other just to survive. And that's the way our brains have evolved over the 70,000 years or whatever it is that our brains have evolved over. We're wired for that type of connection. And in terms of privacy, I've slept in many mud huts where there's 20 people sleeping shoulder to shoulder. There's no privacy.
Yeah.
We have to have our own bedrooms, and when we go to the bathroom, we have to shut the door. I mean, there's no privacy. Everybody knows everybody's everything.
Yeah, and they're happy with it. They're not like, I wish I had privacy.
Yeah, and if they have a disagreement, which humans do, and it gets to a point where it's not resolved, the tribe will gather around the couple and make sure they resolve it, because they can't deal with having bad vibes going on in the tribe for years at a time.
So what about depression, panic attacks, things like that we in the West enjoy abundantly?
I'm not a psychologist, so I wasn't there doing psychological interviews. So, there could be depression that they've worked through, but I didn't see it, to tell you the truth, in my years I've been out there. Of course, you can walk down the streets of New York City and you don't know who's depressed and who isn't.
Everybody. in a way. Just switch the news on.
But pardon?
Switch on the news and that's enough to get depressed.
Yeah, exactly.
And addictions, are they addicted to stuff? Like, we're addicted to sugar and to cigarettes and to cocaine and coffee. Are they? Did you notice any addicted behaviors there?
Not like that. No. In places in Fiji, they drink kava and they'll have kava ceremonies all night. And that's strong. It's stronger than coffee. But, so there are places where they use certain substances routinely. Mm-hmm. But I didn't see much of that. But I'll say this, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of FaceTime together, not FaceTime on screens, but together. And just, I would go to bed sometimes and I'd pitch my tent in the community and I'd want to read. I wanted to be alone for a while, enough togetherness, especially since I can't completely talk to them. I have to go to an interpreter. And they would think I was mad at them. Why'd you leave us last night? What's the deal? So they're just used to being together so much more than I'm used to being together.
Yeah, amazing.
And so that's one thing I noticed: the togetherness and the reciprocal relationships, and they learn it at an early age. Like in this one tribe in the lower Omo Valley of Ethiopia, it was the Karo tribe. There was a kid 4 years old and his brother 8 years old. Their job was to go into the garden where they grew the corn and various squashes and their crops that keep them alive for a year, and guard it from the baboons. And the baboons would come in these groups of 40, and a baboon could carry off that 4-year-old kid. And it's happened. So anyway, these kids who are brave stay in the garden and they start screaming if the baboons are coming, then the warriors come and chase the baboons out. So these kids know that they're totally critical for that tribe's survival. And they know that. They know how important they are. They know that they have to contribute. And so from 4 years old on, we reached 20 and we're wondering if we'll ever contribute.
It reminds me of when I was in Naples, and I went with like a friend, and he took me to this really dangerous neighborhood in Naples, in Italy. And you see like there's these kids who sit on the street corners, and their job is to basically notify the drug dealers or whatever if the police come, so they're part of the ecosystem there as well, and they're all young kids, who are meant to scream or whatever when the police gets there. So
instead of the baboons, it's the cops.
So what about the
anyway, so they have this togetherness, and their connection to each other is very strong. Then of course their connection to the earth is strong. They have to have an intimate knowledge of it just to survive. I mean, I can't go out in my backyard here. I live in a beautiful place on an island, trees and everything's growing like in the jungle almost. I couldn't go out there and survive for 2 days.
And they can dig roots and eat them and kind of what else?
Yeah.
Makes you think, why are we not taught this stuff in schools? They teach us so much crap for 12 years. They could have taught us that, survival in a jungle. Amazing.
Yeah. Or to know our place on the planet. I mean, these people are the PhDs of their place on the planet. They know everything about it. I went on a monkey hunt with these guys in the Rawani tribe down in the, I was hosting programs for Discovery and National Geographic. And, you know, we went on this monkey hunt, and they have these blowguns, 8-foot long blowguns, shooting curare darts at monkeys that were like 100 feet in the canopy. I couldn't see them. I couldn't hear them. I couldn't smell them. They could. And they were getting these monkeys out of the trees. And they'd walk along, and all of a sudden they'd sniff, and they would look down at the ground, then they'd start digging. There was a whole bunch of turtle eggs. Or, you know, they'd pick this plant, and one guy had this rash on his wrist. He picked the plant, rubbed it, and I noticed, you know, a couple of days later, the rash was gone on this guy's hand. So they just know the environment. So they're connected to the environment.
To each
and
other,
they're not only,
and to the environment.
And to the environment. And they have a deeper connection because they put spirit energy in everything. They're spirits of the mountains, of the rivers, of the forests, of all the animals. They take on, they shape shift in, like in the Rawani and in the Amazon. They do this thing called the shaman shape shifts into the jaguar, their main power animal. And so they have this spiritual connection, not only to the environment, to their ancestors. They honor all these spirits, this spirit energy. And so they have this spirit, and they believe that they've just come out of this spirit world, and they'll be going back into this spirit world. So there's this continuum of connection to everyone and everything. So I come home, you know, as I say, I live on this nice island, and I have neighbors all around me. They're all, you know, busy with their jobs and everything. So I see them once a year, maybe. Yeah. My wife will invite everybody in the neighborhood over here for a get together, and, you know, 30% of them show up. So it's you know, we have our friends, but they're scattered about, and it's not living like in a tight community where everybody knows everything about everyone else, and you're connected in that way. And I think this disconnection from each other, from the environment, and from ourselves, you know, in terms, like you said, that's why I want to take ayahuasca, because I want to know that shadow side more. I want to feel what it's like not to be dominated by this ego that's been produced by this culture that worships gathering wealth, having status, you know, power, all those false values that really do not feed the brain that's been wired for connection. So that's what I've noticed.
And I can tell you that before I took ayahuasca, a few years earlier, when I was 28, and I'm 47 now, my first psychedelic experience was actually in Amsterdam with magic mushrooms, and that's when the Great Awakening happened to me. And I just woke up to what you just said, and I was like, you know, after I took the mushrooms and I was walking around along the street, like an hour later, I was a new person. I took my watch off that day. I stopped watching news of any kind. I don't read newspapers. I don't watch any kind of news on any kind of media. I don't listen to the radio. It's 19 years already, and I've experienced this connection to everything and everyone, and I was everyone else, and I was walking down the streets, and everybody seemed so strange, because in a way we are being reconnected with that spiritual knowledge of who we are and what we are and how we're meant to be and how we would like to be, you know, connected. So suddenly everything seems so strange. It's like, why is everyone so cold to each other? You know, suddenly imagine you take somebody from the jungle and you put them on Fifth Avenue. They're going to go they're going to be shocked. They're going to feel so strange and weird. And why are all these crazy people behaving like that and not communicating with each other and so cold to each other and distant and unfriendly? And I felt all that. I felt that everybody is behaving in a very, very twisted way. And I just walked and I was like, but also there's another part of me that knows that I've taken mushrooms, and I'm having an experience. And I was like, wow, this is like, I'm like almost like a 2-year-old kid, but in a body of a 28-year-old. And I'm able to experience both things. And then I looked up, I looked at the trees and I realized that there's no difference between humans and trees. I was a tree hugger, but the point was that I looked at the tree and I saw life. I saw that the tree was alive. You could see the bark moving and breathing like very clearly. And I was like, wow, I am like a very sophisticated tree. So I'm part of nature. The tree is part of nature. I'm not superior to the tree. It's not that I have more rights to be alive than the tree. We're the same. Only I'm a different form of life. And, and that makes you want to hug the tree. Yeah, but you don't have to hug it, because I just put my hand on it. I was like, wow, I could feel the energy, the connection. Right now, I can't feel that. If I walk outside and I look at a tree, I just see a tree. But I know that there's something else there because I remember the experience, you know what I mean, with the mushrooms.
Yeah.
And walking around London, I remember, on different psychedelics, and I could just see that the normal behavior is complete and utter psychotic behavior of humans who don't even know that they are all completely deranged and crazy to a very, very high extent. And they have no knowledge of it. They think they're normal. They think the crazy ones are crazy. And that's craziness in itself. And you can only learn it by taking a very strong psychedelic that snaps you into the truth, into reality, and shows you what reality really is. Amazing. I can't recommend this enough, to be honest.
And we're right. By the way, I still wear a watch.
Time is an illusion. I was looking at the watch when I was on mushrooms. I had the same watch you have, with dials, with hands, and I couldn't understand what it meant. Let's say it's 3:30, and I don't understand what I'm seeing. It's like I see these things that don't make any sense. Now I do understand, but I don't need it, because if I want to know the time, I just look at my phone. Because I used to go like this with my watch. How many times a day you go like this?
I do it a lot.
All the time, but you just do it all the time, like like you're addicted to what is the time? What is the time? What is the time? So yeah. I even came out and I drew this graph of what enlightenment meant, and how in the past people were very enlightened, like the ones you're describing, close to Earth and everything. And the more we went through time, the less people became enlightened and more robotical and in their egos. And man, I had such a revelation. I thought I became religious or something. And from that day till today, I'm still trying to figure out what went on there in Amsterdam. And I read every single New Age book there is, listened to all the gurus. I went through all the, spiritual teachings, Far East, Zen, Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanism, Kabbalah. And I keep learning and learning and learning. And I'm like, wow, it's just endless, how everything is an illusion. And everything is upside down. We are living in an upside down unicorn if you walk out into the street. And people don't even know it. That's how ridiculous it is. So tell me about the film you made, Crazywise.
Okay. Well, after interviewing all these shamans over the years and finding this common denominator, one of the things that stood out to me is how they were identified by having what sounded like a mental illness, what we call a psychotic break from reality. And so I was going to so I was in the midst of a lot of work. I was working for various NGOs, doing a lot of stories, especially about women's issues in the developing world. I not only showed what they have, but I showed some of the things that I felt were not right in terms of the role women played in their communities. And I struggled with it. It was like, okay, who am I to say what role a woman should play? That in Afghanistan, now the Taliban's going to take over. All of a sudden, they're going to fire all the women that are in any position of employment, like teachers, medical workers, civil servants. It's amazing. I was there in between when they were gone after we invaded and kicked out the Taliban, and I interviewed a lot of the women. But anyway, I'm getting off subject. So I did I did a whole series on empowering the women who had broken through the glass ceilings in their communities to empower themselves and all the women and girls in their community, because I realized that if you give resources into the hands of women and you give them education, they will bring that community into a higher level of health very quickly.
For sure.
And that's one of the quickest ways to do it. So anyway, I spent a lot of time doing that. But so I was doing that, and a friend stopped by and said, "Oh, I'd love to do a film with you." And she had no experience in doing film. I said, "What do you want to do a film on?" And she said, "I'd like to do anything. I just want to get an experience of doing the film." And so I had been meditating for about 8 years at that point. I said, "Well, let's do just a short film on meditation. We'll interview a bunch of people that are doing it. What are they getting out of it? What does it do for them? If you are the line producer, you just line up the people. When I'm back in town, we'll start the interviews. I'll show you how to use the camera and set up the sound and all that." So we did, and the third person I interviewed was this kid named Adam that had a psychotic break when he, quote unquote, when he was 20. Immediately told he was bipolar, put on Depakote, a very heavy-duty antipsychotic. And over the next 4 years at one point he was taking 15 pills a day, and a lot of them had serious side effects. And, he would crap his pants, he would, throw up, he felt, he gained a lot of weight, he felt in a fog. So after 4 years, he cut off all his meds suddenly, which is a very dangerous thing to do because they're very addictive. Yep. You get withdrawal when you leave them.
Yeah.
But he cut them all off, and he did a Vipassana meditation retreat, which is 10 days of silent meditation, 10 to 12 hours a day, and it stabilized him. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting story. So he's relating that to me 4.5 years after he had his break. And I said, you know what I'd like to do? I said to Deborah, the person I was working with, I want to follow this guy for a while and just see what happens. So in essence, I ended up following him for 6 years. And that wasn't the end of his story, just being cured with that one Vipassana meditation retreat. He went into a very dark night of the soul and got beat up. When he became homeless, living in Hawaii. Somebody promised him a house over there, and he went over there and it fell through. So he's homeless on the beach. It's not good to be homeless in Hawaii. They don't like people from the mainland coming over there. A gang beats him up, almost kills him. So anyway, the story takes on this. So during this 6-year period of time, I'm interviewing psychologists, psychiatrists, community mental health workers, social workers, all mental health professionals I could interview. I'm wondering what's going on with Adam, what can help him, what won't help him. And I run into a whole movement of people that have been diagnosed and medicated and realized that it was not getting them anywhere and had gone on to alternative methods of taking care of themselves. And I just learned a lot from this movement that has grown so much. And in fact, I became a part of that movement with this film, Crazywise. it was intended to be a cultural comparison. Look at the way in traditional people look at these symptoms we're pathologizing, and look at how they treat the people that go into these states, and look at how we're doing it.
So how are you doing
And
it? Just
pardon?
a few words. How are they doing it? The alternative way.
The shaman that I explained, they take the person and they tell them, number one, their advantages. They tell them, well, number one, you don't have a chemical imbalance of your brain. You're not in pathology here. You have a special ability. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it takes discipline to learn how to work with that sensitivity. You're very sensitive. You've got to learn to work with it so it doesn't overwhelm you. And we'll teach you how to do that. In fact, we'll give you a teacher that has learned themselves and been through it. And then when you learn that, you're going to be respected by the community. You're going to be honored by the community. You're going to have a very important role to play for us. And so look at the other side. Look at the way we do it. You've got a chemical imbalance of your brain. Sorry about that. It could be your genetics. It could be, it's probably your genetics. There's nothing you can do about it. But we can put you on these medications so you can lead a somewhat normal life. Unfortunately, these medications are going to probably drop your sex drive. They're going to make you gain a lot of weight. Some of them will drop your sex. Some of them make you gain a lot of weight. Some of them will make you live 20 years less than the average person. But you'll be able to more or less function.
Yeah.
You won't be in that crazy state.
So the other ones, you said you met this, you were talking about this guy who became homeless on the beach of Hawaii, and then you said that you came across this movement or group of people who do things differently. And when I asked you to tell me how do they do it, you told me about shamans. So I'm a bit confused. Isn't this group like Western?
Yeah. So the Westerners, they managed to do it on their own in a variety of ways. So they managed to learn how to ground themselves. And if we have time to get into the neuroscience of this, it makes perfect sense to me now. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know at the time, what are they doing? So I didn't always ask the right questions, right? But in essence, they found somebody that believed in them. They found somebody that said, I'm fine with you the way you are. What you're telling me sounds crazy. I mean, in the early stages of psychosis, you go through ego dissolution, much like you do in a psychedelic experience. So you lose your sense of self. And that's what the shamans are saying. They thought they were dying. And it's like dying. You may have experienced that on ayahuasca, mm-hmm. Have you?
Big time.
Feeling of
absolutely.
Okay, so
every time I do, and it's scary as hell, but you get through it, and then it's blissful.
Well, just think, if you hadn't known you took a pill or took ayahuasca, it'd be twice as scary,
absolutely.
Right? You don't know if it's going to end, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what a person in our society goes through. And that ego dissolution brings with it a sense of, there's freedom to be free of the ego. Mm-hmm. Just think of all the stuff you have to do to satisfy your sense of self. You've got to be this person in our culture. You've got to be somebody.
Yeah, competitiveness. Compete with everybody, be better than everyone, judging everyone, judging yourself. Horrible.
Yeah. So being free of that is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a taste of that. And so a person in early psychosis can be kind of in heaven. And that's what Adam said. My first interview with him, he said, when it first happened, it was very fun and exciting. I can almost quote it because I played this film to so many audiences. It was very fun and exciting. It was the first time I felt at one with the universe, where I was it. It was me. Mm. And it was wonderful. But then I kept going, and I went way too far, and then it got scary. And if we get into the neuroscience stuff,
What it did? Get into it now. Tell me about the neuroscience, please, because we'll forget later.
Okay. I was talking about how people here got through it.
Yep.
And it was maintaining some connection with somebody, and basically surrendering to it, much like you had to do in a psychedelic
Exactly
experience.
The same thing. Yeah.
Surrender to the process and know everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's just a trip.
That is the message. Yeah. So the message that's often given is you're going to need these pills to get you through this.
Yeah.
So the neuroscience.
Please.
So, as you know, there's this huge renaissance in psychedelic research going on around the world.
Thank God for that.
And thank God for that. Yes, it was cut off for 50 years. Mm-hmm. I remember in the 70s, as I said, you go to a Grateful Dead concert, they're handing out LSD like candy.
Lovely.
It's not always good.
And LSD back then was proper LSD till the 1966 when it was banned.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, a guy named Osley his wife was making it in Berkeley, at UC Berkeley in the labs, and it was pure, and he was carrying suitcases of cash to the bank every day.
Well, Timothy Leary, I'm sure you heard of Timothy Leary and that bunch.
Of course.
So yeah.
But here's the thing, Michael, here's the thing. I was a part of all that to a certain extent. I was in dental school, so, I'm not fully out there as a hippie. I have work to do.
Yeah.
But I was interviewing people on the street because they were sharing their needles and having hepatitis.
Oh.
And we were wondering if we gave them free needles, if they wouldn't get that. So anyway, I was part of it, but I wasn't really part of it. I was a kind of an observer, much like I am now, of the whole world of ayahuasca.
I just want to say about needles, we have to separate. Needles sounds like heroin and crack and that stuff, which is not the psychedelic renaissance you're talking about. Crack and heroin is not psychedelic. It's a no-no, something I've never done, and I'd never recommend anyone does it or even thinks about it. So, yeah.
Right, exactly. But in the 4 years I was in school there, living in the Haight-Ashbury, I watched it go from pot and LSD and mescaline, no ayahuasca, but from those drugs into heroin, not crack, but cocaine. And it went from the summer of love, peace, and it was wonderful music in Golden Gate Park. The music renaissance was incredible, but it went from that into these harder drugs. And by the time I left the Haight-Ashbury, there was at least a murder a day in the community.
Okay.
It turned. So what was missing back then is what, indigenous people have done for millennia. It's ceremonial.
Yeah.
There's a respect brought to it, and the elders lead the thing. It isn't just a free-for-all of kids. I mean, for us back then, it was don't trust anybody over 30. So we just discounted all our elders. We just went on this party. Yeah, and it burned out.
Absolutely. And I could give you another example. We always overdo something. We take something sacred and we bastardize it and we overdo it and we kill it. For example, tobacco. Tobacco is a sacred thing amongst, these tribes. Tobacco connects you to the spirits in other dimensions, and they smoke this special, tobacco rolled in like a leaf, and, they take a few puffs and you pass it on, around, when you sit in the circle with the elders and all that. But you do it, once in a while when you are in a ceremony. What have we done? We've taken the tobacco, added chemicals to it, mass produced it in boxes of 20 cigarettes, full of chemicals, and completely killed the essence of what really tobacco is all about. And what you just said about, what you explained is exactly the same thing, only with mind-altering substances.
Right.
Okay, so
So
back
it's
to the
coming
neurology.
back. Yeah. So now it's coming back I'm hoping, in a much more respectful way. It's going to be, right now of course, it's illegal in most places, but it's being supervised by people that, like yourself, that have had experience with it and that have some psychology behind them that helps a bit, are mainly knowing how to work with people that are in an altered state. So, it's the only thing that scares me right now is it's coming so fast. This is just opening up so fast. Right now, the head of the NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health here in the U.S., has just said, we see a lot of promise in psychedelics. And now that is unbelievable to hear that coming from the head of the NIMH. And that just happened a couple of weeks ago. So this unfolding that's happening, this renaissance, it's now reaching the entrepreneurs, the people that can make money off of this. And there's going to be we have a mental health crisis going on in the Western world. Depression rates skyrocketing, suicide rates up tremendously. And so there is this, we want something. We know the pills aren't working. What we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years aren't really working. They just address the symptoms, nothing to do with the underlying cause of the depressions or the PTSD or whatever. So now it's going to reach the hands of the entrepreneurs. And who's going to be the guides? Now there's all these schools forming to train guides real quickly. Shamans go through years and years of training.
Of course.
And so that's where I'm a little worried that it might open up too fast and there'll be problems around that.
We'll see. I can only tell you. Yeah.
But I think it's very healthy what's going on. And I think it's coming just in time, because not only do we have a lot of people in personal crisis, we're in a global crisis, an environmental crisis, and this chaos that's going on right now, I'm just hoping is what is needed. In a break, a person goes through a chaotic period to come out the other end in a transformed and a much more conscious state. And I'm hoping that's what's happening on a macro level as well.
So about what you said, I believe that this psychedelic renaissance is over. In a way, it's already done its job. It's been there, done it. What I mean is 20 years ago when I woke up, thanks to magic mushrooms, I heard about I know for the last 20 years, a lot of shamans kind of came to the West, from South America in order to hold these ceremonies, in order to introduce ayahuasca to many people. You can go to ayahuasca, you have been able to go to ayahuasca ceremonies in America, in Israel, in England, in all over Europe, from Greece to Germany, Belgium, everywhere for the last 10 years at least. It's peaked, okay? And they already woke people up, a little bit of people. However, it's not enough. And that's why God now brought the real big guns out, after which everyone has to wake up. And I'm talking about this engineered, imaginary pandemic. And now we're at a state or a point that people are already injecting themselves on a mass scale, or they let themselves being injected with an experimental liquid, as we know, and we don't know what's going to happen. The whole thing out there is just ridiculous. Everything is crashing. So whoever woke up, over the last 10 years, because they were lucky enough to have a psychedelic experience, they could look at what's happening and go, this is here to wake everyone else up. People who didn't have psychedelic experiences, and that's the mass, the masses. And it's a very effective way, very cruel way, and very sad way to wake everyone up. But it's working, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. What I'm trying to say, when I woke up, I realized that the government is not my friend. I realized the education system is not my friend. They've done a lot of damage to me while I thought I was educated and I went to school and I learned really important stuff. Crap, waste of time. All the judges, the courts are all corrupt. The police, all the companies, corporations, everything is rotten to the core. Okay, when you take psychedelics, you see it. But not many people took psychedelics. How many people took psychedelics? 0.001%. That's why what's happening now out there is happening, because there's no more. No one could. Mother Earth is not going to wait for anyone to wake up anymore. Now is the real time for everyone to wake up, and that's why it's happening. And I'm being very careful because I don't want to be censored by YouTube. But so I'm trying to insinuate to kind of give you hints as to what I'm talking about. But I'm sure you understood. So I don't think that there's going to be this big renaissance now, and people are going to start taking LSD and other psychedelics, and suddenly wake up and realize, that they've been lied to, and they're being, people they're being treated as robots and taken advantage of. Something much worse has already happened to them to wake them up, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well,
so let's talk about the neurological aspect of psychedelics.
I'm not quite as I have, I'm not going to throw out everything that we've built and say it's all crap. I'm not that far along, but I think we do have to integrate a whole new way of perceiving reality and each other to get out of the mess we're in.
It all has to collapse, to come down, crashing. So then we could rebuild it, modeling it on those indigenous people, plus science and many other good things that we've picked up along the way. So what about the neurology? You said you wanted to talk about the neuroscience.
Yeah. So the main interviews I've done is over in Imperial College in London, where they're doing the trials on treatment-resistant depression. And there's a guy over there, a young guy that started the department, Robin Carhart Harris. Do you know of his work?
Nope.
Okay. He's a good person to check into if you can get him on the program.
Yep.
So anyway, the Renaissance in psychedelics is being opened mainly by the fact it started at Johns Hopkins in the US under the name of a guy by the name of Roland Griffiths, who said, listen, we've found that a psychedelic experience is very helpful for somebody who's been diagnosed as terminal cancer patients. So to relieve the anxiety of dying, evidently a psychedelic experience will help very much in that way. And so who can say no to somebody that's dying that finds something that can help them make that journey easier?
Who?
And so that's
what do you mean who? The leaders?
I mean, who
the
would?
system?
Who would?
The pharmaceutical companies? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. It made it hard for people to object to it.
Okay.
And that's where this Renaissance started.
Okay, good. I'm pleased to hear that.
And so now we've learned it's great for addiction. It's great for treatment-resistant depression, eating disorders, PTSD. It's good for a lot of conditions that we don't have great answers for. And it shows a much better rate of healing in all those areas than our classical approaches.
Yeah.
So this has led to universities all over the world opening up to the fact, even though the substances are illegal, to being able to study them, because we haven't even been able to study them for 50 years.
Yep.
And so So Robin Carhart Harris has approached it. He's written this paper called The Entropic Brain that I would suggest it'd be a great starting point to Google that and read that paper. But so the two things happened in the last 20 years, 20, almost 30 now. One, fMRI imaging was discovered, and that's an imaging of the brain that you can do and actually see blood flow in the brain. So you can give somebody a task and see what part of the brain is operating at a higher level during that task. Okay, then so they started studying the brain, not only in terms of this part does auditory, this part does vision, this part is motor. They started looking at the brain in terms of networks, how these different parts of the brain are communicating with each other and interacting to do abstract things like our sense of time or our sense of self, our sense of ego self. What parts of the brain are involved in that concept? So the network that is getting the most attention, you look at the number of papers in the scientific journals, and it's like a exponential curve. Since the default mode network was discovered in 2001, and it's getting a lot of attention. And it's the one that fascinates me the most because it does. So what happened is they would put somebody in an fMRI machine and tell them, okay, just relax a moment and then we'll start the tests, whatever they were going to have them do or have them concentrate on. And so there was this one network, the default mode network, when they put them in and told them to relax and just, let your mind wander, just go into your daydreams like the mind typically does. Certain parts of the brain would light up. It was the prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and this part of the brainstem, the more primitive part, the limbic system, that they believe houses emotional memory, especially older childhood memories, that sort of thing. So they saw that light up, and then when they started the person on the test, gave them some project to concentrate on, to their surprise, that network started shutting down. The blood flow decreased in it. And that was interesting. So time goes on and they start the psilocybin tests with it. Give a person psilocybin.
Which is
mushrooms. The whole thing.
By the way, psilocybin is mushrooms, as you know.
Magic mushrooms,
yes.
Yeah. It started shutting down almost completely. And wow, how interesting. So to make a long story short, neuroscientists now talk about what this network does. And first of all, they call it the grand conductor because it takes all this sensory data, just tons of sensory data that's coming into our five senses and makes it so we can deal with it, or we would be completely overwhelmed as adults. Babies don't have developed
it's like
what
filters.
We've developed. And
I think it's also referred to as filters.
These filters, they call them mental models. They call it predictive coding. We take our experience from the past and we overlay it on all this data so we don't have to pay attention to all that data. And we make a good judgment, a pretty good judgment about how things are going to be. And so we're looking through the filters of our past experiences and beliefs when we look at this thing we call reality. And as a group, we develop a consensus reality. We all agree that, some things change over time, right? Now the earth is round instead of flat. Now we're starting to say maybe there are UFOs out there since the government's releasing more data of people that see them, and they're not completely stigmatizing somebody that claims he's seen one.
Yep.
So this consensus reality can change, but nevertheless, we're looking through the lens of those beliefs when we look at reality, and that's how our beliefs and our prior experiences and prejudices help us, let us see this reality. Well, those predictive codes and everything are housed evidently mainly in this default mode network. That's what they're thinking at this present time.
Okay.
And so you talk, pardon me?
So what's the point?
So the psychedelics disable those predictive codes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main predictive code is your sense of self as being separate from a part of everything else. And those codes start going away. Now, when they first start going away, and I've talked to many people diagnosed as bipolar, and they'll talk about their hypopolar state. I forget the term right now. Yep. But it's when first going into it, like Adam said, when it first happened, it's fun and exciting, then I went too far. When you first start losing those codes, all of a sudden your creativity goes up, your sense of everything looks more vivid, and you're seeing things a little bit differently, almost like for the first time. So you can look at that bark on the tree. My God, it's breathing, and because in our predictive coded lens, we look at the bark. Yeah, it's tree bark.
Yeah, you make chairs. You make chairs and tables of it. Let's move on.
Yeah, right.
When you're on psychedelics, you can just look at it for like an hour. At like a little tiny area. And just see a whole world in it. You know what I mean? And it's
exactly. But
okay, good.
If you remove those predictive codes completely, you wouldn't be able to navigate your world. You wouldn't be able to, you would be psychotic and have to be taken care of if you were all of a sudden stripped of all that information and be like a newborn baby. So it's important to have it. I mean, the brain developed this grand conductor called the default mode network for a reason. But if those predictive codes carry a negative view of yourself or the world, if they if they give you that feeling of been there, done that, and if they take the enchantment out of your life, out of the world, out of this miraculous existence we're in right now, you can become totally depressed. And so that's why if you take and give somebody a psychedelic under the right conditions, and those predictive codes start to dissolve, and they break those loops of thought that are just etched in their brains. They break free of that for a moment. All of a sudden, wow, they're free of that, that perspective and that depression. And it's very liberating.
Yeah. So
what they've discovered at Imperial College in their studies with treatment-resistant depression, anyway, unless you have a way of integrating what you've seen, like you just said a little while ago, you go back, oh yeah, it's just a tree.
Absolutely.
You have to reinforce that ability to realize the magical place we're in right now, the enchanted, you go back to the Disney movies and life is like that. So anyway, I became very interested in the default mode network, mainly because of ego dissolution. I would love to be free of my ego and what it causes me to do or have to do.
Yep.
I'm more aware of it now at 78 than I was when I was a teenager, of course, trying to build it. And but at the same time, I see it popping up all the time. And I'm also wanting to have the experience like you have of seeing the world without the heavy influence of the predictive codes that are just so heavy that it blinds me to the reality of the world, this enchanted place.
I would say there's different reasons to and different ways to use these means, and it depends who is using it for what. So most commonly, every person who's never tried a psychedelic experience and is experiencing life through the culture that brainwashed him or her till this day, they could go and read, philosophy, and they could read about Buddhism and spiritualism and non-duality and Advaita and Ramana Maharshi and all that, and listen to it and kind of feel, there's something about it that kind of interests me. But because our brainwash is so severe, it's very hard to change it. So everyone should try a psychedelic just once as a educational experience. So when, for example, you give somebody 2 grams of magic mushrooms and say, go and sit in the woods for 5 hours or lie down, have these 3 grams and let's talk later. During the 5 hours, it's like reading the whole Far Eastern philosophy 25 times, going to a psychology therapy with 55 psychologists, where you are your own psychologist for 5 hours, experiencing all this shamanic knowledge throughout history, all in 5 hours by yourself. And then you come back and your whole view of life changes because you've experienced it. You've experienced oneness. You know what oneness means. You have been oneness yourself, and you have been the higher self without the ego. Yeah, you're back to the way you were now, but at least you've had a glimpse of it. And now you can go and read all these spiritual books, and you could do meditation, and you could learn about non-duality, and you can practice, noticing your own ego and kind of letting it go and realizing who you are really, and all that stuff, because you were given a glimpse of it. So that's one reason. You could do it just once and never again, and it's going to do its trick, or not. As I said, some people can just go back to the way they were and just say, I felt a bit weird. Now, other people are people who have these conditions. So I agree that you can treat them. Like MDMA. Have you heard of MDMA? MDMA is also being used in Israel, I know, to treat people with post-trauma disorders. Because when you take MDMA, which is like the drug of love, people go, it's called ecstasy, and they go dancing on it, and they love everybody and hug everyone. That's not really a psychedelic, but it allows people, because they have all this surge of serotonin, I think, in their body. They love everybody, and they're also able to touch the pain body, people who've been to therapy, people who experienced abuse, and they are heavily injured, psychologically, and they can't touch the pain. When they take MDMA, suddenly they're able to do work. There's a therapist there in a room, in a therapy room, and they have a bed, and they just can roll on the floor, and they can talk, and they do extremely effective therapy for a couple of hours on MDMA. And I heard the same thing about, as you say, LSD. People who are alcoholics, they take LSD once or ayahuasca, and they go, why am I killing myself? And they never touch alcohol again. You know what I mean? So there's ways, therapeutic reasons for using these substances in a controlled environment, with professionals. And then some people do microdosing. I don't know if you heard of that. It's when you take 1/10 of the dose. So if you took 2 grams of mushrooms, you'll have an intense trip and you could experience all these things. Take 1/10 so that's a 0.2 of a gram. So you don't really feel it, but you could go about your day. And I know many people, you could Google it, who do microdosing. In Silicon Valley, apparently, they take 1/10 of an LSD, whatever, tab or drop or whatever, and they go to work, and they're creative, and they don't have anxiety, and it's way, way better than taking antidepressants, for example. And so it all depends who is using it for what reason. And I agree with you. It's amazing that people are opening up to it, and it's helping. It's doing its bit in society.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to talk about a few other things that'll do the same thing besides psychedelics.
Yes, please.
Do the same thing to the default mode network, because sometimes psychedelics isn't the answer for everybody.
Of course.
So there's other things that will do it. Meditation shuts down the default mode network. And they've studied these monks, like Tibetan monks, that have put in 10,000, maybe 100,000 hours of meditation. Their default mode network operates at a much lower level in terms of activity than the average person. And then when they are in the machine and they go into one of their meditations, it drops further. So meditation. The other thing is flow states. Extreme athletes go into this state all the time, where they lose themselves to the activity they're doing. And artists and athletes can go into that state. Evidently, people that have near-death experiences have gone into that state. And, mystics of old, there were some mystics that probably never touched a psychedelic, but they spontaneously went into it. And maybe it's like somebody in our culture that spontaneously goes into it and manages to go through it. The thing is, when you've gone through it and you've integrated it partially, your level of compassion and empathy will go up, and you will feel much more at home in this place that feels threatening when you're very individualistically involved. So one of the problems is when you have these experiences, you go back to our culture. And our culture in the West, especially, is very individualistic. We are the cult of the individual, really. And not that individualism is bad in and of itself. I mean, some things are great about having that individual experience, but we've taken it to a toxic level where competition and under the capitalistic system is just gotten so out of hand. And not that I'm against capitalism, but everything needs balance. Just like the default mode network, you need it. So I think the skill that the shaman learns is how to leave these filters, these predictive codes, and this ego behind, and go into this, what I like to call an extraordinary state of consciousness, but they also learn how to come back. They know how to go in and out of it. And their means of induction are very different in different parts of the world. It's much like drumming is a big factor in Mongolia and Native American circles. In Pakistan, I visited a group right on the Afghan border called the Kalash. There's 3,000 of these Kalash people have a shamanic culture, and they burn a fire of juniper branches and sacrifice an animal, pour the blood of the animal over the branches. The shaman inhales the smoke. As you know, plant medicines like ayahuasca, datura, peyote are used in tribal groups, South America mainly, but all over the world. Plant medicines are used to go into these altered states, but they do come back, and so you have to have ego consciousness to work in this world. But it's good to have that perspective that leaving that behind can give you. So I don't want it just to sound like this, coming from me anyway, this advertisements for psychedelics. The giving of yourself in service is one of the best ways of getting out of the ego. devoting yourself to a life of service and doing that. So there's other ways of tempering this egocentric mind that our culture produces.
Yeah.
But the problem is integration, coming back to this culture with the values of accumulation of wealth, status, celebrity, power, and being able to put that aside and keep yourself sane.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the aim. I would say in my case, I'm hugely into non-duality. Non-duality is Advaita Vedanta. And after all these experiences, I found out that there's like a whole section of Hinduism, and there's a famous guy, a guru called Ramana Maharshi, who died already, and he talks a lot about it, I am that. And then there's Nisargadatta Maharaj, and there's people in the West now who talk about who explain this whole teachings, and it's basically all about living a non-dual life, or experiencing the non-dual dual safe, which is your real, the real you, which is beyond the illusionary separate sense of self. It's the you that is undescribable. It's consciousness. It's the knowing. It's the you that experiences everything, and cannot be and is infinite and is timeless, and it's beyond time and space, and cannot be described who really you are and what you are. And there's a lot of practices, or maybe non-practices, or ways to kind of sink into that state. And it's called non-duality. And, the idea of all these psychedelic experiences is to just realize that there is this state, and the aim is to get to it naturally. I mean, I do it every day. I try to reach it naturally. And I listen to online, teachers of non-duality, and I interviewed a few of them, and I will interview more of them. And that's what I'm advertising, non-duality. And the psychedelics are just a mean of accepting that non-duality exists. Because some people would say to you, what do you mean oneness? What rubbish are you talking? What do you mean, what oneness? There's no oneness. Look, you're over there and I'm over here. What's the matter with you? Well, these people needed to have a psychedelic experience and then say, now go and read Advaita Vedanta, now go and learn Buddhism, now go meditate, do Vipassana, and carry on. And you don't need to ever do a psychedelic experience. Only once, just to kind of get you out of that state of non-acceptance and resistance to this idea. Great. What can I say?
That's exactly why I want to do it, Michael.
Yeah. And let me tell you, it won't change you. In your case, actually, you're already there. You already know about it. So in a way, if you took mushrooms or ayahuasca, you might come back and say, "You're great. Yeah, I know that. So yeah, I felt it, but I didn't learn anything that I didn't know." I mean, maybe you will. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you can't do any harm. But you are very there. You are very, in the mind frame of knowing the truth, and it's just a matter of being the truth.
Yeah, and profoundly feeling it, which I'm waiting for that experience. Yeah, I know about it. I can intellectually talk about it, but I need to get it down here.
You have a calling, then you should obviously do it, and better sooner than later. So, just throughout your journeys, how did your beliefs change? Did you mention that? Did you talk about that?
I guess, yeah. I mean, so my journey began, I would say, with the death of my father when I was 7. And my mother watched him die, and he was in an oxygen tent. He had lung cancer, and he was basically drowning. His one remaining lung was filling with liquid. He's in this oxygen tent, struggling, and she watched his face go from this horrible struggle and pain to this smile of recognition, like he recognized somebody that came to get him. And she was convinced that somebody had come, because just seconds before he dies, he gets a smile and this peaceful look, and just like he recognized. So that sent her on a very religious trip in Mormonism. So I got this huge dose of Mormonism from the time I was 9 years old till I was a teenager when I left the church. But I also had, after my dad died, the spiritualist aunt move in with us. And she had been institutionalized because her husband and only son were killed in an accident, and she went off the deep end, and she ended up one night, and they had a lot of money, and they were up on this hill in Los Angeles, and she ended up throwing all her huge couches and furniture into this massive bonfire, and that got her institutionalized. So when she got out of the institution, the asylum back in those days, she came to live with us right after my dad died, and I could hear her calling in the spirits at night and giving out these wailings, and so I was frightened to death. And then she was asking me if I wanted to talk to my dad, and no, I don't want anything to do with dead people or spirits. And I was just freaked out. So that's where it began for me.
Wow.
This wondering about this world of spirit, and then put it into a religious context where there's a God who is a guy in a robe in heaven, and we're all going to die, but then we'll be reunited with our loved ones, and everybody will know each other. So, and then some things happened in between that, but then I'm introduced to the world of shamanism because I'm doing human rights work, and then the neuroscience. So that's kind of been my journey.
Yeah.
And what I've learned, so I could have never talked about what I'm thinking about now back when I was a kid.
Yeah, well,
but again, I've had a lot of experiences. I've had a lot of adventures in my life. And the most important thing for me is learning how to tame my ego. I think that's in a nutshell. And experiencing that.
Okay. And what about
freedom.
Work-wise, your plans for the future?
I'm actually writing a book right now. I hate to say it, it almost sounds like a memoir, but it's about that journey I've taken. And I'm forcing myself to write because I'm not inclined to sit in front of a computer and type all day long. So, but I'm getting there. So that's what I've been doing recently. And again, just doing more work like you've done with psychedelics, and just more so I can get more of a understanding on a very deep level. So have me back in a couple of years, and I'll probably have a lot more to say.
Yeah, tell us all about it. Brilliant. So, okay, we've covered all of the subjects that we've had planned to. And that brings me to the final dramatic part of the interview, when I ask you to please address directly from the bottom of your heart and soul your fellow brothers and sisters with a request, demand, or suggestion, or any message that you would like to impart to them. So, Phil Borges, the stage is yours, and go ahead, please.
Oh, boy. Well, it all has to do, if you could condense everything I've talked about, I'll default to my hero that we started off with, the Dalai Lama. What is your religion? Kindness. I practice kindness. Practice kindness.
Excellent.
Every day, practice kindness.
It's short and sweet. What a wonderful message for your fellow humans. And what can I say? Phil Borges, I've had a wonderful time. 1 hour and 54 minutes talking to you. I could go on talking to you for hours. And I've really enjoyed it. And I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I've enjoyed it too, Michael. Thanks for what you're doing. And keep it up.
Brilliant. Thank you. And good luck with everything you're doing. And to you, our lovely viewers, thank you very much for watching. As Phil said, be kind on a daily basis. That's what the Dalai Lama says. That's what we all believe is the right thing to do. So thank you for watching, and I shall see you in the next interview. Goodbye now.